Good evening. I apologize for the vaguely threatening sounding announcement that if you're over 65 and don't use light posts, come see me, like I'm going to beat you up and make you use it or something. That really just has to do with our baskets that we give out at the end of the year to our 65 and older. We're using light posts to get the list for that, and you should be on the list on light posts even if you don't use it, but we just want to make sure we don't miss anybody. So if you would just check with me just so I can get your name on the list, that way nobody falls through the cracks. Hopefully as we get in the process, everyone will be accounted for, but just want to explain that I'm not going to hurt anybody who doesn't use the app. We'll all be fine. Speaking of technology, I want to think about inventions that change the world. Can you think of any inventions that really changed the world as a whole? There's things that have made a small blip. There's things that seemed really big at the time and they went away. I'm sure at one point people thought that car phones were just going to be the greatest thing ever. Now you can talk on the phone in the car. As we've seen, the car phone went the way of the dodo, right? Nobody really has the car phone setup anymore. So sometimes it takes a while to see if inventions really stand the test of time. But what are some inventions that changed the world? One that comes to mind for me as I think about just impact on the whole of human history would probably be the Gutenberg press. Johannes Gutenberg in 1440 developed and created the first printing press. And before this time, to make a book, to buy a book, to own a book was something that only the richest people or those in places of extreme privilege could have. For instance, not everyone could own a Bible. I think about how many times we say, well, of course, any good Christian at any time in the past should have checked the truth against the Bible that they had. Well, what if you don't have the Bible? What if you can't read the Bible? That's very difficult. Well, when Gutenberg created the printing press, it changed everything. Now books were much cheaper to make. Of course, there was a little bit of time on the uptake of making that possible, but it changed things in a religious sense in the world. You had people like Martin Luther that now with the proliferation of the press could read more materials, could put out more materials, and maybe stand up against some of the atrocities that were happening with the doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church. You had things change politically. We saw over the next several hundred years how political upheaval happened almost across the world map as people, the lesser people, the lower people, started to learn that they didn't have to put up with certain things that were going on with their government and many more things that go down today. The Gutenberg press certainly changed the world. What about Bell's telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, right? In 1876, the first telephone call was made. Alexander Graham Bell was attempting to revolutionize telegraphy, the telegraph industry, and in the process, he happened into creating the telephone, essentially destroying the use of a telegraph. And from that point on, again, communication was able to be much more accessible to people. You could talk and hear people's voice, potentially from around the world, from across the country. Now you can call pretty much anybody anywhere. And so just a couple of inventions we can think of that really changed things on the world stage. Well, I wonder if this one was on your list. Friendster. Anybody think of Friendster? Probably not. 2002 was when Friendster showed up. You may have never heard of this website before. Well, a year or so later, there was a website called MySpace, right? A little bit more popular, a little bit more familiar. We kind of get what we're talking about now. And then after that, we had a veritable explosion, right? We're talking about social media. Social media, something that, again, let's say 25, 30 years ago, if you would have said social media, people would have said, what are you talking about? I have no idea what that is. There's no concept of it. But it's something that's kind of come on the scene and now exploded to the point where life really isn't the same as before social media. We live in a society now that the turnover of the culture happens rapidly. It seems like every 3 or 4 years we have a completely different culture than we had just shortly before. And I think a big part of that would be social media. Now, even within social media, there's turnover. This image is several years old, and several of the social media platforms you see in this image are no longer in existence. They've been done away with, and they've made way for bigger, newer social media platforms. But what we do know is that social media is almost ubiquitous at this point. It's used by people all over the world, and the reason that it's so big is because there's big money involved. Social networking was listed as one of the 25 technologies that changed the world on CNET.com, and under their blurb for social media, they said, today Facebook helps people connect and stay connected, but its real business is advertising. In 2019, it brought in $32 billion in ad revenue. It also helped pave the way for other social media networks that help people chat, share photos, and find jobs. Among other activities, it now has 2.37 billion users, nearly a third of the world's population. Can you imagine setting your goal for that? We would like a third of the world's population to use our product. But they do. Facebook, again, maybe the biggest social media platform, but this is something that we're inundated with. We know I have a Facebook account. I'm friends with several of you on Facebook. I could go right now and search you, right? We use social media. Even people of a more advanced age use social media, right? Maybe not the same one. Years ago, the kids got on Facebook, and then their parents started getting on Facebook, so what did the kids do? They ran away from Facebook and ran to the next one. And then after a while, that became lame. And then they ran to the next one. They ran to the next one. And so you see there's this turnover, but still, at this point, people of all ages are using social media. And so the question that comes to mind, at least it should for us, is what should a Christian do with it? What should a Christian do with social media? How should they think about it? How should they react to it? It's one of those things where we can't just say, well, social media doesn't really have a place to be talked about in the church. Maybe, again, you're of a certain age and you say, well, I don't use a computer. I have no use for a computer. I'm not on social media. It doesn't mean anything to me. We're past that point. It's affecting the world around you. It's affecting your life, whether you're involved or not. Again, you didn't opt in, but this is where we're at with our society. And so what should a Christian do with it? Well, that's what I want to think about tonight, another kind of thought detox style sermon dealing with the culture of our age, the way that we think, the way that our minds have been shaped by the culture. And this lesson is not anti-social media. It's not me saying social media is bad, there's no use for it. That's not where I'm coming from. Rather, I'm talking about the idea, what if social media, which is designed to bring people together, to connect people, to, again, social society there, it's something that brings society together. What if it has the opposite effect? What if it makes society worse? What about in situations where we can see that actually people are being divided. People are growing apart from each other. They're growing in hatred towards each other. And that, I think, affects us as Christians, because now this can be a danger to our Christianity, to our life, to our character, to our influence with others. And that's something that we need to think about. So what does the Christian do with social media? And again, this may be a little bit more informal of a lesson, but I just want to share some thoughts that I have with you and get us thinking about how we interact with these things. Well, one option, I guess, would be to totally abstain from social media, right? We see our Mennonite and Amish friends around us, and they make really good donuts, and they seem to be happy enough. A lot of them live without the technologies and the things that we use, right? Now, I know that Mennonites, I think, are a little bit more open to using modern vehicles and stuff like that, but there's even those, like the Amish, that would have none of it, right? They totally abstain, and I've actually received in the mail recently some literature from a local Mennonite community of a religious sort, and found a lot to agree with what they were saying, not necessarily the particulars on salvation, but as I was reading through their material, one thing they said was, they were talking about television. They're still a few years behind, I guess, but they said television, the danger that comes with the idea of watching television and taking that in is so great that it negates any possible good that could come out of it. And on one hand, I have a TV in my house, so I thought, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but I can also see where they're coming from, and I think maybe you can too. There is a lot of danger that comes with technology, with having culture being streamed into your home. There is. And so maybe someone says we should totally abstain, but I don't think that that's reality for the world that we live in. I think that this context may help us in John 17. Jesus is talking to the Father, and he says, I've given them, the disciples, your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Jesus is speaking to a truth here with God that we have to hold in the tension of our life as Christians, that we are not of the world, but we are in the world, right? We go out and we eat at the restaurants that the other people eat at. We go to schools with other people. We work with other people. We aren't hermits, if you will. Now, that hasn't always been the case. There have been some that have secluded themselves. I think of, for instance, a group called the Essenes. This was a Jewish community that in the lead up to the turn from BC to AD, the few hundred years before, they looked at the Jewish system. They looked at the Pharisaical system and said, you know what? This is so wrong, everything is mixed up and messed up from what God wanted, that we're actually going to go out in the desert, we're going to create our own community, and we're going to divorce ourselves completely from society so that we can wait for the Messiah to come. What was the problem? When Jesus came, guess where he went to? Society. He went to the sinners. He went to Jerusalem. He went to the priests and the Pharisees and all of them. That's where he went to. And sadly, from history, it seems that maybe some Essenes, who you may be familiar with from the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were involved in the production of those, that were very much looking for the Messiah. But historically, besides maybe a few converts, it doesn't appear that the Essenes in large part came over and became members of the church. Right? Their seclusion ultimately did not help them. Now, what am I saying? I'm not saying we shouldn't abstain from evil. I'm not saying we shouldn't divide ourselves from wrong. But what I'm saying is we have to live in the world. We do live in the world. And that's what Jesus intended for us to do, again, in part so that we can be shining lights for people. And I do think that there are positive uses for social media. I think that it can be a good thing. The fact of the matter is social media is a tool, right? Like so many other things in the world. It's something that we choose what to do with, and we can choose to do good things with it. Just a few that came to my mind. One is that social media is good for staying connected. I know that over the years, I've not been the best grandson and always being connected, calling my grandparents on the phone and doing that like I should, but I have tried to stay connected with them, surprisingly, through Facebook, right? They could see pictures, they could kind of keep up with what we were doing, and they really enjoyed that and maybe continue to enjoy it. That's something I think is positive for social media. We do the same thing here at church. Again, I'm not going to kneecap you if you don't use it, but we have a social media app. Right? Light posts. And I enjoy that. We can post pictures directly to each other. We can let each other know what's going on. We can post prayer requests, all these things. I think that's a wonderful thing that we can have. It's a good use of social media. It's something that we can enjoy. Speaking of enjoyment, social media can in some form be entertainment. Now again, we may scoff our nose, and maybe in the world as Christians say, well, what do we have to do with entertainment? The fact of the matter is, we find some sort of entertainment. Reading a book from the 1600s is entertainment, right? It's not something specifically that we might do because we have to do it, but because we want to do it. We want to be entertained. We want to enjoy things. I don't think there's a problem with that, and social media can be used in that way as well. And lastly, we can use social media to amplify the Christian message. We can spread the gospel through social media. Now, I want to put an asterisk by this one because I've heard people overplay this point. Almost as if, hey, social media, this is the next frontier of spreading the gospel, the Great Commission. We're going to go to social media and we may, but I don't think life-changing things like the gospel are really what people are going to social media for. Now, we may draw someone in. We may create a Bible study and create an opportunity, and I'm thankful for all the souls that have found out the gospel and been baptized and saved through the use of social media. But I think that we have to keep in mind and keep our expectations in check that really most people for that kind of thing is going to have to be a face-to-face interaction. It's going to have to be us talking to them, which is hard. It's much harder to go and talk to someone. But I think we can't let ourselves off the hook of evangelism by saying, well, we have a Facebook page. We share some verses on Facebook. We share our sermons from Center Grove on Facebook. It's a great thing and it helps, but that can't be the whole of our witness, I guess is what I'm saying. But it is a positive thing that we can do, and I think it's something to keep in mind. So with all that said, what's the problem? If all these good things can come from social media, if we have all this good stuff, what's the problem with social media? Well, you can tell me, right? I don't need to ask you. You can tell me a list of everything that's wrong with social media, probably the same list of what's wrong with the world at large, right? Lots of problems happen when we look out at the world. Again, that tool that can be used for good can also be used for bad. As I go as far as say evil. It can be used for very, very problematic things that can be a stumbling block for us in our Christianity. So first, I want to think about some general dangers of social media, and then I want to get a little bit more specific after this. But these are general dangers that anybody of any age, I think, could really fall into when it comes to the use of social media. For one is this: social media is something that can become a very negative force in your life. Pew Research, October 2020, stated through a survey that 64% of Americans say social media have a mostly negative effect on the way things are going in the U.S. today. I would say even more than that if you ask the general public, is social media a good thing or a bad thing? They say, oh, I hate it. Every time I go on Facebook, I see something that just makes me mad, and I'm just swiping, and then what do they do the next day? They get back on Facebook, right? So they're not mad enough to stop using it, but they're generally negative about it. They say, well, there's not really much worth seeing on there. So it can become a very negative thing in our lives if we dwell on the negativity that it brings. But also it can become a big time sink. This is just a very general kind of thing, but this is from a survey on time spent with social media by Hootsuite. This is from this year. It said with more than half, and that's 58.4% of the world's population now using social media, social network users are now estimated to spend more than 4 trillion hours on social media this year. Okay, that's not like every person's going to spend 4 trillion hours, but it means collectively everyone's going to spend 4 trillion hours, which I did the math for you there. That's 456 million years worth of time this year spent on social media, right? That's a lot of time collectively there that's being put into that. And on an individual level, of course, if we look at the statistics, we can see that hours and hours of people's day are spent on social media. And if we're all honest with ourselves, that could probably be better used on most anything else. Maybe in small spurts for entertainment, but again, this can be a general problem. Well, what else comes with social media? We've often heard the phrase, especially in the last few years, right? Fake news and stuff like that. But the reality is social media is full of falsehoods. We think about fake news and the things that we go on social media to see. You know, when I log into my Facebook account, it's funny that it needs to remind me at the top of the page to vote, and then maybe give me a handful of totally unbiased facts about, I might want to know about the upcoming election, right? That's interesting. Well, why does this site that was originally supposed to share pictures with each other, right, or recipes for the grandmas, you know, why are they doing this now? Why are they interested in this? I'll never forget, this was years ago, but when I was streaming church service in my TV through Facebook, and the video went off, and I thought, okay, and then it flashed this big giant logo, and it was like an astronaut, and it's like, Facebook TV, the future is now. And I thought, well, that's scary. Like, I didn't ask for that to show up on there, but it's like, wow, they've put a lot of money into this. They put a lot of time and effort into getting into people's living rooms. Well, is what we're hearing true, right? I can go on Facebook and look at any number of fact checkers for anything that's been said in the news cycle for the last 24 hours. And some people go on social media, whether it be national news, world news, local news, personal news about another person. They see it online and they take it as what? It's gospel. It's true. I'm going to tell everybody I know. I'm going to share that. I'm going to spread it around. And that can lead to a lot of problems. Well, we also see fake lives on social media, right? How many people, if we looked at their social media profile, you see the picture and go, man, they must have it all together, right? They must be truly happy. They live the life. They get to do this, that, and the other thing, only to find out in the wash that things aren't what they seem. Because, of course, people put their best foot forward on social media. They want to appear to have everything together, but the reality may be much more sad. And it can create a falsehood to where people live this lie and everybody else believes it, when in reality that person may need help. They may be in a bad situation, and it can lead to a lot of problems. And just in general, the amount of lies that are thrown around on social media, and I think especially applicable to us, would be in a spiritual sense. You can go on social media and find any number of people that claim to be experts, theologians, scholars, philosophers. They have everything figured out, and they will speak as if they have everything figured out. It's very easy to get drawn up into that. It's very easy to listen and go, well, this person must know what they're talking about. They're on the computer screen, right? Just like years ago, well, it's on the TV, it must be real. It's on the internet, it must be real. It's on social media, it must be true. Not so, right? Very much not so. Of course, we always have to remember Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. My general recommendation would be, and this is not a good way to be generally in life, but I think with social media especially, be slightly cynical about anything that you see on social media. Always have at least an inkling of, is this true? Is what I just read true? Because there's people out there that have no reason to tell me the truth. They have every reason to lie to me. They have every reason to trick me. But is what I'm reading true? We ought to test things to discern, especially of a spiritual nature, what the true will of God is. I think about the hatred, bitterness, and abuse that shows up on social media. The Bible teaches us that the tongue can do great evil. It can kindle a big fire very quickly. And social media is just another avenue for people to speak to each other, to share their thoughts with each other. And I have seen some of the most hate-filled, bitter abusive things I've ever seen in my life thrown around on social media. Now, of course, you could go to these big pages and big posts and see all kinds of problems and things in the comments there, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about locally. I'm talking about near to home, these things that you see. I mean, it is everywhere. I don't care if it's a post about a festival going on down in Gainesboro. I don't care if it's a church post. This isn't something that doesn't happen. It happens. It's happened on our page. It's happened that people, again, spew these things and they get upset and they throw this and it becomes a platform for nothing but grief. It's not the way that it should be. It's not something that's setting our mind on those higher things that are helping us focus on God. Rather, it's dividing people. It's giving people a soapbox. And I will say this too, sometimes in our mind, especially we're Americans, we like freedom and freedom of speech. Not everybody deserves a pulpit to stand behind and speak from. I may not deserve this one. But not everybody deserves to have their voice amplified everywhere because they may not have anything worth saying. Or the things that they're saying may not be worth hearing. And so again, we should keep that in mind that just because someone can speak doesn't mean they should. And some of the things that I see posted and said are just awful, hate-filled things from members of the church. I think about Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And I think that remains true for social media as well as it does in person. The way that we post and interact with each other, we should always be thinking, what would God want me to do? How would God want me to speak as an ambassador of Christ, as a representative of his church? What am I putting out into the world? Something we should definitely be thinking about. And then finally, kind of sounds funny, but the influence of influencers. Influencer is a new job title. I guess now kids show up at kindergarten saying one day they hope to grow up and be an influencer. What is an influencer? It's a person that gets paid to post on social media about food and drink and movies and TV shows and theme parks and vacation spots. That's what an influencer is, right? And you might say, well, who in the world would listen to somebody on the internet talk about this random garbage all day long? Millions and millions and millions of people. And they make millions and millions and millions of dollars for these big companies. But the scary thing to me is that these influencers who are essentially walking billboards, living commercials, convince people, as they would, because you want to be likable, that they are their friends, and people then turn to these influencers for life advice. They're going to them and seeking their counsel, whether it be through TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or wherever, and saying, well, these people really have something to say. These people have something to teach me. I'm going to listen to them. And hey, I like this now because this person likes it, or they're showing me this, and this is how I'm going to act. I'm going to be more like them. It becomes a real problem. And don't think that this is all grassroots, small stuff. Oh, this person has got a following, and they've kind of built it up on their own, and they're just kind of naturally popular. No, big money is involved in this. I found an article. This is from 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it's the same on both sides as far as the targeting, but this is specifically the Democratic Party. DNC focuses on young voters' social media presence. This was during the Democratic National Convention, and it said throughout the convention, Democrats paid special attention to young voters, emphasizing their campaign's social media presence and selecting speakers to appeal to Generation Z. In addition to thousands of credentialed members of the media, more than 200 social media creators were invited to cover the convention for their audiences. Influencers were also invited to speak on the main stage. 30 years ago, this would have been laughed at. You're going to have an internet living commercial come and talk before a political convention? Absolutely. They're trying to target young voters. They want them to see and follow their political ideals, and they'll use whatever means necessary, especially social media. And again, this happens not only with politically, but also spiritually. You have people in these churches, we have locally in Cookeville, these big churches, popular churches, very, very attractive churches. They're big on social media outreach, right? They draw people in. And of course, that looks very attractive, but we have to be careful. Think about Colossians chapter 2 and verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy, by empty deceit, according to the human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. When we go to social media looking for something that should already be filled up in us through Christ, the truth of the world, our worldview, what we think about, what we focus on, when we're going to social media for that, we're taken captive by social media. We become a slave to that type of thinking. It's something we have to be very, very careful about. And speaking of being very careful, I want to be very careful with how I talk about this next part. I don't want to be crude, but I think that social media gives some very specific risks that target specifically males and females. Now, I'm going to start with males because that's easier for me to talk about. It's easier always talking about my own problems than somebody else's. But let's think about, what is social media? What issues does it pose to men? I hate to say that it's just simple, but in our generation with men, it basically is simple when it comes to internet, social media, TV, anything. Porn is the problem. Porn is the problem. The statistics tell us, and I always hate to say this because it's awful to say, the statistics tell us that we have a porn problem at Center Grove. And I hate that. I hate that, and I don't want to believe it. And I want to say, no, we're different. We're not like everybody else. We're not like the main numbers. But the statistics say that we do. Because the statistics say that everybody does, everywhere. It's the sin epidemic that is facing our country today, in large part. And of course, women are not exempt from that. I don't want to say that women are exempt from that. Women are partaking in pornography too and can find that addiction just the same way. But the statistics show us that men usually fall into it more, number one. And number two, men are being targeted to fall into it, right? Men are being targeted by porn. But social media opens a whole new door, right? Because pornography has been around a lot longer than social media has. But social media and interpersonal interaction can open the door for more, can it? How many affairs nowadays start where? In direct messages on Facebook. In private chat rooms, right? These places that people go. Again, this is something that men are being not only involved with, but being targeted for. The advertisements that you see on social media, the things that they're trying to reach people with, that is targeting them to fall in to these sins. And it's not just adults. I think sometimes we think this is an adult sin that adults are doing. No, that's not true at all. Common Sense Media did a survey that said 15% of teen respondents said they saw online pornography at age 10 first or younger. The average age reported for first viewing is 12, and more data is telling us that these numbers are high. They're high. You may say, I can't imagine a 10-year-old looking at porn. I'd say imagine younger. It's happening younger and younger as our children are exposed to these different things through, again, avenues like social media. The vast majority of respondents said they have seen pornography. Nearly half, 44%, indicated that they had done so intentionally, while slightly more than half, 58% of teens, indicated that they had encountered pornography accidentally. Right? That's that targeting that we're talking about. And again, comment sections on social media, random pages, you click on one thing and it's right there. They're trying to seed it out, especially to young people. Unintentional exposure to pornography could be a common experience for teens, as 63% of those who said they have only seen pornography accidentally reported that they had been exposed to pornography in the past week. Now, I don't think this survey was just happened to be the 1 week that everybody did this. It's something that's happening often, and we're seeing it targeted, again, especially through social media. It's something that, again, companies make robots. They're not even real people. It's something, if you're on social media, you're familiar with bots. They make these bots to, again, message men, message young boys, young women, whoever it is, they're trying to target them to get them to look at these things. Of course, we know the biblical concepts still apply. We think of Ephesians chapter 5 and 3. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Men, women, whoever it is, again, men in large part are more affected by this. There's no place for this in the church. There's no place for this in Christianity. And it's something that we all struggle with. And it's something I saw recently, a video of a young woman in tears saying, I'm trying to find a godly husband, and I cannot find a guy that's not addicted to porn. This is happening. You won't, again, the sadness is that young women may not be able to find a young man who's not been influenced by this. We have a generation of young men and older men that have been under the sway of it. What do? We've got to start addressing it. We've got to start helping people. We've got to start saying, hey, if you have this problem, here's how you get out of it. Here's how you can find the grace of God. Is the church ready to do that? I hope we are. It's here. It's already happened. It's something that we really have to think about. And again, social media just amplifies that problem. Again, Matthew 5, we know it. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. There are people, I saw a video earlier this week, the owner of the website Pornhub talking about how the pornography industry was a vibrant, lawful, great industry where no one is really getting hurt. That is a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. Pornography is not a victimless crime. Viewing pornography is not a victimless crime. If you say, well, I'm not hurting anybody, no, you are. You're hurting yourself, you're hurting the people you see in the video, you're hurting everybody involved. And if you're in here, you're hurting the church by viewing it as well. I say it full-throatedly, we have to be aware of this. We have to be on guard for this, and social media for men, I think, is one way that it is even increasing the amount of exposure that we find. Now, I want to be very careful when I talk about women, because I'm not a woman, I'm married to one, but it's difficult when I talk about these things because I don't want to seem like I'm a man bashing women. Again, I'm talking about things that people are targeted by. As much as pornography is a grievous sin that oftentimes men are the ones falling into, they are also victims of an industry and a world that is trying to lure them into that. And that's not good. They're responsible for their sin, but they're also victims of a predatory industry. In the same way, I think that women are being targeted. They're being spoken to, they're being preached at by an industry that is largely focused on what I put here in quotation, self-care. You hear that talked about a lot nowadays. Well, it's all about self-care. It's about taking care of yourself and focusing on yourself, prioritizing yourself, your own mental well-being. And I want to be very careful with that because we know that even the Bible says, you shall love your neighbor as who? Yourself. The Bible implies that we should have some amount of love for who? Ourselves. The thing is, I've never had a problem loving myself. I'm not talking about looking in the mirror and going, man, that's one fine-looking guy. I'm saying I've never not stopped to feed myself. I've never stopped taking care of myself. I've always made sure that I have what I need, right? That's the kind of self-love that all of us really have in the self-care. What are we talking about here, and how does it turn into selfishness? It's something that we have to be very careful with, especially as we're talking about women being targeted on social media. In an article called #Women's Rights, this is by UN Women, the United Nations, everyone's favorite worldwide organization that is always involved in so many wonderful things. Here talking about an organization of women that focuses on, again, women's self-care, mental health, empowerment, yada, yada, yada. It says, through social media, women have a new space to speak up and be heard. With its power to encourage solidarity and collect shared experiences, social media has become a new frontier for women's rights activists to organize and allies to join the fight for equality and justice. From politicians and lawmakers to farmers and small business owners, conversations are connecting women around the world so they can support one another in the push for gender equality. Now, I've spoken before about gender equality and how, in large part, the conversation around that is not about equality, but about shaming men and telling women that they should be unhappy with their circumstance in life. Now, I'm not trying to be blunt, but that's the reality of what most of it is today. Obviously, there are bad situations where women are abused, and those are awful. That should not be the norm, and obviously that should be addressed, but that's not what we're really talking about here. We're talking about a political push that's trying to empower women. Well, what is it empowering women to do? I don't want to pretend that this is representative of everybody, but the article I'm about to read you, I think, is the logical endpoint of a society social media addled that pushes women to say, I'm unhappy and I deserve more. An article from The Atlantic by their editor, Honor Jones, is an article called How I Demolished My Life. It's maybe one of the most sickening things I've ever read. Again, not something that's representative of every woman by a long shot or every woman on social media by a long shot, but still gives us an insight into the thoughts of this one woman. She said, I thought, soapstone counters and a farmhouse sink. I had wanted an island and a breakfast nook and 2 narrow vertical cabinets on either side of the stove. Slowly, I realized I didn't want this kitchen. Slowly, I realized I didn't want this life. I didn't want to renovate. I wanted to get divorced. I didn't have a secret life, but I had a secret dream life, which might have been worse. I loved my husband. It's not that I didn't. That's so sneaky, so evil. She loves her husband. It's not that I didn't love my husband, but I felt that he was standing between me and the world, between me and myself. Everything I experienced, relationships, reality, my understanding of my own identity and desires were filtered through him before I could access them. You don't talk like that on your own. You don't think like this on your own. All these inner experiences that I can't access, This has been taught, right? She's been taught, you're not happy, you're not being true to yourself, there's something more that you should reach for. I started imagining other lives, other homes. I wanted to be thinking about art and sex and politics and the patriarchy. How much of my life had I built around my husband? Who could I be if I wasn't his wife? Maybe I would microdose psychedelic drugs. Maybe I would sleep with a woman. Maybe I would write a book. By breaking up our family, I'd taken something from my kids that they were never going to get back. Naturally, I thought about this a lot. There was nothing I could give them to make up for it except maybe a way of being in the world, of being open to it and open in it. Garbage, right? I ruined my kids' lives. I broke up our family and our marriage, but maybe I can teach them how to be open to the world and in the world. Maybe I'm deluding myself. Maybe I'm not free of anything, and I just want different objects, a different home, and maybe someday, admit it, a different man. Maybe I'm starting the same story all over again. For what, you'd ask me, and you'd be right, but I don't think so. I think I'm making something new. Now, this is extreme, and this is awful. And this is selfish, but the thrust of what our culture is teaching young women is moving in this direction every single day. Don't be happy with what you've got. There's something more exciting over there. You deserve better. You ought to focus on yourself and on your needs. And I have seen, again, it's not a way, it's not in different communities. I have seen young women in our community post things. Do things for attention, create situations, and post them online that were diabolical, selfish, evil. And it's a comment section of 100 to 200 women, Christian women, not any that I know that are sitting in here, but I've seen them. And I don't want to call it the hen house effect, but it's saying, you go, girl. You go, girl. You do what's good for you. You're the most important. You be happy. You live your life. You live your truth. Evil. Evil. And we ought to decry it as such. It is not what God wants in the lives of our young women, in the lives of anybody. It's not fair to anyone. I think about, again, the Bible, a very basic teaching. The verses seem to be kind of a different context, but I think it goes together. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. Now, this isn't just talking about young married people. It's talking about young people, I think, in general, and all people. We should be content. We should be happy. It doesn't mean we can't want better. It doesn't mean we can't be shooting and striving for something better in our life, but it does mean that we can't let social media convince us, man or woman, that we should be solely focused on ourselves and improving ourselves and being more true to ourselves, to a sense that we turn into selfishness, that we're focusing solely on ourselves. This is something that I really wouldn't even have a platform to talk about unless I had not heard and seen that it's happening to people in my life that I know locally. But if you go on social media, you will hear a lot of talk when it comes to mental health and all these things with young women. A lot of the influencers in that are talking a lot about boundaries. You need to set healthy boundaries in your life so that you can be happy, especially in relation to toxic people. Now, back in the day, toxic meant you take this and you'll die, right? But toxic kind of means something different now. Toxic just in general means someone that is oppressive to your life, right? A toxic person is oppressive to you. And of course, there are people that have been oppressive in folks' lives. I don't want to say that there's never been someone with an abusive father or a narcissistic mother or someone who has spent their life really making their child less. These situations happen and they're awful, but they don't happen to the extent that they're talked about today on social media. Not everyone is a narcissist. Not everyone is toxic. A lot of time what toxic comes down to is they don't affirm the choices I make, so I don't like them. They're not nice to me about the things that I do in my life. My parents have opinions about the way I raise my kids, so I'm going to cut them out of my life. I'm going no contact, right? Something that, again, I've heard more than one time in my circle, people I know and knew. And they get married, and these young women are basically telling their mother-in-laws or their mothers, I'm sorry, you'll never see your grandkids. You're toxic. You make my life worse, and so I'm cutting you out. It's awful. It would have been unheard of in society not long ago. Where is the sense of duty? The sense of, hey, I ought to honor my parents, my in-laws, even if they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I ought to honor them. And yet again, what young women are picking up from on social media is that, no, you focus on your well-being and the well-being of your kids. A lot of times it comes back to, I want to be selfish. Now again, I'm not saying that all of this is hogwash. I'm not saying that there's not a time where, hey, I'm in an abusive situation and I need to have these people removed from my life. That may come, but never do it as an elective. Never do it because I want to. Never do it because it would be more convenient for me to do these things. And I think that we're seeing more and more people in society turn in that direction. It's such a sad thing. Again, Ephesians 6, we roll our eyes because it's so talked about. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment. I fear that, again, we're raising a society through social media, a culture that's focused on making children hate their parents, making young men hate their fathers, making young women hate their mothers, and it's of the devil. It's awful. It eats away at the bedrock foundation for our society, which is the family, and we cannot stand for it. And so again, when these things creep in through social media or wherever they creep in from, we have to put a stop to it. It has to be talked about. We have to put it in the light so that we know that our daughters aren't going to fall into this mistake. Our children, our grandchildren aren't going to fall into this mistake. We have to be proactive. And so finally, how do we have a Christian mindset about social media? Just some things that I think that would be good to think about. Number one, draw your line of influence. Now, again, once upon a time, signing up for Facebook wasn't a big deal. Oh, Facebook, you can post pictures, you can find recipes. I think I'll sign up for Facebook. Social media is a whole different game now. When you're getting into social media, when you're opening your mind there, you have to realize there are people out there that want to convince me of certain things that may be right or wrong. I think it would be good before interacting with social media to draw your line of influence. And what I mean by that is, I am who I am before I ever log onto this website, and what the people say on this website is not going to change who I am. I love my wife. I don't need to have an affair with somebody. I love my God. I don't need an influencer to teach me about Eastern mythology, mysticism, whatever, that's going to improve my spirituality. Here's my line of influence, and once they go past this, I shut them off. Because I don't need that. That's not what I'm using social media for. And I think it's wise to draw our line of influence there. I want to say 13 years old when I had my Facebook account. Maybe I was 14. I forget. I know I was young, and I think it would be ludicrous to give a child that age a social media account now. I think where we're at with social media, and I'm not trying to diss anyone in here, if your kids have one, you may monitor it, that's great. I think in general, now, given the state of it, parents, you ought to say no, or at least you're not going to do it by yourself. You're not going to have an unmonitored social media account. You're not going to get to be on Instagram anytime you want to, private messaging people. No. Parents have to say no. Kids, historically, how do they feel about no? They love it, right? They don't like it. You're evil. You don't want me to have friends. You don't want me to be popular. You don't love me. I don't care. I care more about my kids' souls. I care more about their mind. I care more about these things that are going to follow them throughout the rest of their life and affect them and me and the church family and everyone around me. And so parents, we have to be willing to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this. It's not the time now. Only when you're older, and even then we need to train ourselves to go, there's got to be a line for everybody, adults, kids, whoever it is. So again, parents, be willing to do that. Third, monitor time spent, right? Think about how much of my life is wrapped up in this social media app. I am a terrible addict of Twitter. Now it's X. It's been bought by Elon Musk, but I got to the point where I could almost instinctively, like a muscle memory, open my phone and hit that Twitter and open that and then start just looking, just without even thinking. It was just very natural to me, and I still struggle with that. But it's something that we have to be intentional about monitoring and saying, how much time am I prioritizing this over my church family, my actual family? You know, the amount of families now, you see the pictures, and again, I'm not without sin, where you see a family sitting together and every single person has their cell phone in front of their face. You know, we're so distracted by this, and it's something as a Christian I think that we have to be very careful not to go overboard with, because it's so rampant around us at this time. And number 4, just remember who you are. Social media, as we've already said, should not change who we are as a person, as a father, as a son, as a Christian, whoever it is. Social media shouldn't change that, because so much of it is just so vapid. It's just so worthless. And I don't mean that really in a particularly staunch way of getting really worked up about it. It's just worthless. There's just not anything to it. And the amount of times we give ourselves over to worthlessness, we might lose who we are in the process. We might forget what's really important in life and be distracted from the most important things. At the start of the lesson, I had Brother Sean read Ephesians 5, and I think it's a verse that's evergreen for whatever situation comes up in the culture and life. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. The hardest thing about culture and the hardest thing about keeping our mind in check is the fact that things change constantly. The church cannot bury its head in the sand and say, well, that social media stuff, that's all for the kids. We don't really know anything about that. Well, that pornography stuff, that's really all for the kids. We don't really know anything about that. That internet stuff, we're not really going to address that. If the church doesn't address it now, then who will? Who will? Who are we waiting on? Is it going to be the media? Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be the public education system? No. The church has to be the one that's proactive in addressing these things because we've already lost. This sounds really bad. I would say we've lost 2 generations of kids, in large part. And I'm not talking about at Center Grove. I'm talking about the church in general. We've lost about 2 generations of kids. That the majority of kids that were in church buildings, we know now most times over 90% are gone. And they're never coming back, at least except by the grace of God that maybe their hearts are pricked. But that's not all the church's fault. That's not all because, hey, we should have grabbed them by their feet and held on to their ankles. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is we have kids that have come into the church, and I believe the church has not addressed what is going on, the struggles in their lives. And this is what's going on in kids' lives. Social media is the struggle sometimes. Pornography is the struggle. Maybe it's their view of themselves is the struggle that they have going on, but I think it's the church's responsibility for us to be careful to address these things and let kids know, hey, you're not alone. Let our members know, hey, remember who you are. Remember whose you are, and know that, hey, this here, tonight, together, this is the most important thing. These other things online, it's not worth losing your soul over. It's never worth losing your soul over. And so tonight, again, it's not been a traditional lesson, and traditional invitation may be odd to say, if you've sinned on social media, maybe you need to come forward, but maybe you have. You can sin on social media. You can sin through the internet. You can sin in all variety of ways. And a lot of times those are private things. But the problem with private struggles is that sometimes it's really hard to get help for them. Sometimes it's really hard to say, hey, I'm struggling with this and I need prayers. I need to be lifted up. My exhortation to you there would be, hey, talk to a brother or sister that you trust. Talk to someone who say, hey, I know you're not going to throw me in the trash can and never have anything to do with me. I have this struggle and I need your help. These kind of things require us to lift one another up and really support each other. And I hope that we're willing to do that in our lives.